A genre I've always wanted to talk about more on this channel is the turn-based RPG. Aside from stuff like Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth and the trilogy of smelly sin videos I did on Final Fantasy X, there's been a sore lack of RPG representation on here, and in the future, I want to change that. The next RPG I was going to talk about was Lost Odyssey, a game that at the time of writing I consider one of my favourite games of all time, though I'm not sure how well it holds up just yet. I have started playing it and those opening hours can kiss my ass, but while searching my Xbox library one day, I discovered that somehow I own Blue Dragon. Blue Dragon was developed by Mistwalker, a Japanese-American developer led by Final Fantasy veteran Hironobu Sakaguchi, and the studio that would go on to make Lost Odyssey. And looking at a bit of footage of the game, it was pretty clear that the two shared some DNA, and not just because they were turn-based RPGs. So I shelved Lost Odyssey for the moment and fired up Blue Dragon instead to see how Mistwalker got their start, and to see what this Final Fantasy vet would have in store for us. And honestly, it's kinda mid. Not in the way Twitter users call everything they don't like mid, but in the, wow, this game sure does exist way. I enjoyed my time with it, but that was mostly owing to the battle system rather than anything else. That battle system though, it's a lot of fun. Blue Dragon adopts a similar turn-based style to Final Fantasy X, where you observe a turn order at the top of the screen and have to plan your moves around that. It starts off simple as expected, trading blows and pegging potions at each other, but once you start to level up your shadows, it becomes way more interesting. These shadows are the game's main gimmick, and visually it's a pretty cool one, each party member's shadow transforming into a giant blue creature that stems from their feet and fights for them. The amount of times I tried to draw Shu's dragon shadow as a kid would probably be considered insane, as is the amount of times I completely butchered it. Spoiler alert, it was every time. Each character's shadow comes pre-installed with its own unique class, but as you level shadows up, they're able to unlock new classes and take on entirely new roles in combat. Attaining class levels unlocks new skills, which you can then assign to your shadow no matter what class it may be using. So if you wanted to, Jiro could be assigned the white magic class, but take on skills from support or barrier magic classes, or Maru could be a swordmaster, but keep the monk's ability to charge attacks. Charging up attacks is actually a key component of Blue Dragon's combat though. Monks and mages, and those who inherit their skills, are able to charge their attacks, whether it be to apply extra effects or to potentially save a bit of MP, though this pushes them back in the turn order. You'll be able to determine exactly when you want your attack or spell to go off as well, so there are interesting decisions to be made at times. Do I cast this spell immediately with less of an effect, or do I risk taking hits before popping the spell off with higher power or area of effect? Charging some spells, for example, changes how they function, whether they affect one target or a whole row, and this applies to magic cast on the enemy or on the party. Black magic spells also don't work exactly as you would think either. It's not just, oh, here's fire and water and wind and all that. Fire, for example, always strikes a single enemy. Wind can be charged up to affect a whole row, water hits a whole row by default, and ground hits every enemy on the battlefield unless their little footsies are not planted firmly on the ground. But more than that, enemies have their own behaviour and will react differently to certain methods of attack. You can disarm these discount Haxoruses, for example, by flinging wind magic at them, drastically decreasing their defense. Some late game enemies I encountered didn't take kindly to my guys charging up physical attacks, which made them target those silly enough to do so. Or you can soak certain variants of the poo snake with water spells to make them all mushy and susceptible to physical attack. Somehow, Blue Dragon having piles of poo as its weakest enemy still is not as bad as being able to grip shit in your bare hands in Dragon Quest, but still. And while in the overworld, you can target multiple enemies and initiate combat with them all at once, taking advantage of the natural rivalry between certain species and watching them duke it out right in front of you. That last thing actually doesn't get used a whole lot in the latter half of the game, and honestly you have to be so close to both groups of enemies that by the time you think of pulling them into battle together, you've probably already been hit by one and dragged into battle yourself. But regardless, all these systems make for surprisingly dynamic combat that had me pretty engaged all the way through. Admittedly, it is one of those games where any character can become anything, taking away from their individuality, and it feels a bit weighted towards acquiring specific class skills towards the end. Shu, Zola, and Maru were all assassins by the final dungeon, all having similar skill sets like charge attack, double attack, absorb HP, etc, while Jiro and Kluke were both interchangeable as black and white mages. One just had barrier magic while the other had support magic. It felt like I had two distinct party members that had achieved mitosis at some point during their journey, but also they became women or tiny annoying little shits. In fairness, this is a problem that a fair few RPGs had around this time. Final Fantasy X and 12 were the biggest offenders, but unlike Final Fantasy X, where once you hit post-game everyone but the fastest characters were rendered irrelevant, magic uses always feel viable in Blue Dragon. Unlike those two, however, it's also insanely easy to bring the game to its knees. Once you unlock an overworld skill that immediately defeats any enemy you make contact with and gives you shadow points, you can level up the classes you want and nab all the best skills long before you even attempt the final dungeon. Coupled with accessories that give you double SP, and you'll face less than an hour of grinding before your annoying little children are outfitted with skills so overpowered that they'll just steamroll everything. Regardless of my issues with it, Blue Dragon still has a really fun combat system, and if you choose not to break the game, it remains consistently challenging throughout the 40-ish hours it takes to beat. I left it idle for the weekend, I swear to God. I really wish the rest of the game held up to the same standard though. Outside of combat, Blue Dragon is the most bog-standard RPG I've played in a good while, almost to the point that it becomes parody. When you're not watching your shadow trade blows with sentient pieces of crap, you're subject to pretty standard RPG progression. Going to a town, getting some new objective, heading to a dungeon, beating the boss and pressing forward. Blue Dragon uses a classic overworld style when moving between towns, dungeons and other places of interest, while everything looks normal once you enter said places of interest. Visually though, the game's really muddy and lacking in detail. Character models are fine, sometimes even charming thanks to Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Quest artist Akira Toriyama being on board, but environments are pretty bland, and this is only worsened by the strange depth of field effect that extends about as far as my wee will whenever Sony wisens up and greenlights Mod Nation Races 2. These dungeons are also a bit of a slog to trudge through, as movement speed makes it look like I'm only tilting the left stick part way, and many areas tend to be needlessly big and empty. Some of the music to go with these towns and dungeons is also kind of irritating, to be honest. I have to actually turn my headphones down when visiting one of the camps, for example.
Join.
And with some of the town themes in general, they feel like they've been ripped from some other RPG altogether. On the flip side, there are some pretty nice dungeon themes. The main battle theme is decent if somewhat repetitive, but it'd be wrong of me not to mention the boss battle theme. It's an incredible collaboration composed by Nobuo Uematsu, with some pretty badass lyrics by Hironobu Sakaguchi, and vocals done by none other than Deep Purple vocalist Ian Gillan. I don't know how this came to be, but it's one of the few times where I can't say I've wanted more battle themes, because almost every boss battle being backed up by this power metal masterpiece is all one could and should ever want. Something I really dislike is how they place items throughout each area. You've still got treasure chests you can find, of course, but for some reason they also place a lot of smaller items on objects in the background. Potions, minuscule amounts of gold, tiny bits of EXP and SP. Discovering this early on, I was convinced that eventually really good items would be hidden like this, so a decent chunk of the game was me grinding my face against walls and headbutting unassuming room decor, picking up every tiny item I could find until it became clear that the reward for doing so was negligible, and I stopped doing it altogether about halfway in. I have no idea what the devs were thinking when they thought this would be at all an engaging way to explore each area, and if you end up playing this game as a result of this video, don't make the same mistake. It doesn't even feel particularly thoughtful, especially when you examine a bowl of fruit and it gives you 10 gold? Why? Who's slipping gold into a bowl of fruit? Is the fruit made of gold? Is this a jelly donut situation and the fruit is actually gold itself? How deep does this iceberg go? By far my least favourite part of Blue Dragon though is the story. When I play turn-based RPGs, I find that even my favourites can get a little repetitive after a while, but it's usually the narrative and characters that keep pulling me through, that make me go, okay, yeah, nah, let's play some more, why not? Blue Dragon just doesn't have that going for it at all. The main party is either hugely irritating or hugely forgettable. Jiro's a Caden from Mass Effect-ass character who's got the personality of crusty bedsheets. Tara Strong is totally miscast as Kluke, giving her most flat delivery I think I've ever heard. Zola's the tall one, I guess? And Maru is cute, but there's only so much I can take of his shouting. Thankfully, they break his shouting up with more shouting. Except it's horny shouting instead.
Don't just stand there. Come with me.
For who's supposed to be the main character though, Shu is pretty awful. He doesn't really have much of a driving force, he doesn't really go through much character development, and about the only thing that defines him is his refusal to give up and his insistence on saying so at every given opportunity.
I won't
give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. Dang it. I won't give up. I won't give up. And I won't give up. I said I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. I'll never give up. I won't give up. I won't give up.
We're being pulled up! What's going on?
I know why. It's because I said I won't give up.
Wait, no, I apologize, he does go through a character arc. After 25 or 30 hours of not giving up, he decides at one point that it's okay to give up sometimes. Riveting stuff, truly. But this I won't give up stuff is so goofy that it actively negates the emotional resonance of a couple of scenes, including this one, where a girl is about to commit suicide. Bit of a tonal whiplash for a game that looks like this, I know. But then Shu's like, lmao, you fucking coward, don't give up. Like, cool, I don't know, I don't think a game with such juvenile characters, in the literal sense not a detrimental one, can handle such heavy topics, especially when it responds to them with a shonen protagonist saying his funny catchphrase. And there's really not much to say about the overall plot either. A bunch of kids are granted funny magic shadows and they want to use them to beat this old purple guy up, and along the way they just kinda travel to towns and help them out with whatever issue they have. In that sense, it's like Dragon Quest. You could point to almost any game in that series and it'll follow the same formula. Mini plots within a grander narrative. But those mini plots are usually bolstered by memorable characters unless you're playing Dragon Quest
9.
Those stories have layers. Not many layers, but layers. In Dragon Quest 8, for example, you're not just going to a town of thieves and pilferers to progress the story, you learn more about one of your trusted party members there. You're not just helping a cowardly prince slay an overgrown lizard, you're learning more about the man betrothed to the Ulse princess, your character's love interest, and why you should despise him and the arranged marriage. What do you learn then when you come across a town in the snowy mountains with a big force field around it, when you step through it and get trapped within? You go in, you learn the people in there hate magic, then you fix the problem and everyone loves you and you move on. Nothing you do related to the characters you control, creating a disconnect between them and the plot that makes it hard to care. Doubly so when, spoiler alert, skip to here if you don't want to spoil the game for yourself, I'll wait a sec. We good? Good. Doubly so when you get to the end and things totally spiral out of control. The planet splitting open, spawning Minecraft dirt blocks, blah blah blah, whatever, bit weird, who cares. When you get to the final boss, it's revealed that Zola was working for the villain Nene all along, given a shadow by him in exchange for becoming a spy in one of the major towns in the game. But then she turns around and says, "No, I would never betray my friends, you big stinky," and offs the old codger. But then, not even done, this little dude, Deathroy, this annoying little motherfucker who's been talking like this the whole game.
Land shark?
Land shark!
No intelligence at all.
At all!
It's any wonder they're so audacious. They're children.
The children!
That's enough.
Yeah, so you don't think much of him, right? He's basically the slug thing from Ratchet Deadlocked. Cool, now imagine that slug thing is actually a biomechanical god? It's a fun boss fight, mind, but it's also the stupidest looking final boss of all time. Poor looking ass. This feels like a plot written by a grade schooler at times, or at least it feels like it was written for grade schoolers, but then it also has Shu saying stuff like,
"That bastard!"
and then there's that one girl who nearly jumped off a cliff. It's like it didn't know what it wanted to be, and it suffers greatly for it. I'd always heard lots of good stuff about Blue Dragon, but I'm not sure I see what others see in it. Everything outside of the battle system is tedious, vapid, or flat out nonsensical. There's nothing interesting about the exploration, the characters stink, the story's barely there. But you know what? That combat system is just enough to leave a positive impression on me. It's dynamic and interesting enough to pull me through, and though maybe I wish I'd not gone out of my way to power level my characters and break combat with busted skills near the end, I still had a blast, smacking poo snakes with my sick ass dragon shadow guy. And it's also really interesting playing this and seeing how parts of it would later be used or improved in Mistwalker's next game, Lost Odyssey. Holding a button to charge attacks and magic feels similar to the ring system. The segmented stories you can find feel like a precursor to 1,000 Years of Dreams. Some of the menu systems feel familiar. Hell, even a bunch of voice actors carry over between games. They share a lot of DNA, and that's great, because that means that they were able to take Blue Dragon, a game I thought to be simply okay, and make something even better out of it. Having said that, I'd still recommend Blue Dragon if you're a fan of the genre, at least for a single playthrough. Its storytelling and systems outside of battle are very much of an era gone by, but the battle system holds up pretty well. And you fight monsters while Ian Gillian occasionally wails about staring down eternity. I cannot stress how fucking cool that is. Hey, big thanks to Furball, Sofox, Aether Ruby, K, Damien Maxted, Nation McAltile, Finny Shea, Heathoot Skyet, Jayet, Johanna Sanderson, Kurote the Kitsune, Pear Basket, Philip Elk, Rodent Bird, Run Fast There Smith, Scadius Grim, Squid Superstar, The Dervinator, Sadie Killer, and everyone else who supports me on Patreon and Coffee. Sorry about the rushed intro, everyone else is asleep, but follow me on Twitter, join the Discord server, support me on Patreon and Coffee. And before Twitter goes down, does anyone want to admit they have a crush on me?